welcome to this week's Leadership Moment. I'm reminded about a story that happened a couple years ago from a friend of mine. He's a physician, and he got called to go to court over a case in which a patient called him to be negligent over a procedure that medical procedure that had taken place. And I remember that I was a little worried about him because, medical doctors, and how are they going to navigate these slick lawyers and go through all the conversations that happen when you're already nervous in a courtroom setting. And I remember asking him how he prepared for it after it was over. And he talked about, looking over the cases and looking back through the journals and looking back at his notes and everything like that. And I said, were you nervous about anything? And, it was real poignant at the time that he said, I really reflected over and over again on my values. And I used that to help guide me in the conversation of how I responded to the questions when I was being cross-examined. And I asked him what he meant by that. And he said, I just had to remember my responsibility as a physician, for example. And when I thought about that and I shared that, then I talked about how I made every precaution and made sure that every precaution was put in place when we were going through all the procedures. And when I talked about the idea of my integrity, I talked about the idea of sharing all the information ahead of time and making sure that I was staying in the realms of where he was supposed to when it came to the medical procedures that took place. And I think about that constantly in the respect of this idea about how this person in that very tense moment was living out his values and putting that into practice, into motion. And I think about that in the work that we're doing right now. And so we're not in a courtroom and we're not on trial for anything like that, but we're definitely plastered with questions of things that we may not even know about. And as leaders, I challenge you as you're going through all this realm of unknown is to go back to the things that you do know about. And those are those values that you have. Maybe you've written them down and maybe you haven't. Maybe it's time that you do that. Just take some time over the weekend to write down what your values are, and then to start self-reflecting on how can you make that evident, how can you make that real and come to life with the staff and the people that are around you, and then work together to say maybe it's an opportunity to clarify and create building goals and core values and beliefs, and really then get to that next point of, but what does it mean when we put those into practice? For example, is a value for us to be open. And if we're open, then we're going to be open to try new things as we go through this. And we're going to catch ourselves, and not in a gotcha sense, but when we start to kind of say, this is the way we've always done it, are we going to say, let's go ahead and pause and say, let's try to be open during these moments? Maybe another value is optimism, and that we're going to choose to be positive through all the outcomes and situations that arise and not get bogged down by the what ifs that might come across us. So as you're planning and making your plans for all the things that have to happen, and those things need to definitely take place, it's important that as you're building that action plan in making sure our schools and your buildings and your classrooms are all set up, make sure you take that time to step back even further and say, gosh, what are those values that we can put into place? How can we make those evident for the people that are around us, including ourselves, to our staff, to our parents, to our students, and make it something that's living and breathing. Give yourself that opportunity to write it down. Give your permission to talk about it in your staff meetings, in your department meetings, and then have that conversation to say, how can we share that and make that part of our culture with our students and our families also. So with that, I hope you have a great week. And again, this is your Leadership Moment.